Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Monday. I am Barb Nelson with Beacon Virtual Assistants. And today we are going to be doing a special video interview with my good friend, Kathy Smith. Kathy Smith owns Best Choice Tax and Bookkeeping. And she is here today and she's going to be answering, I've known Kathy probably for about a year or so. And she's going to be answering all of your questions about the PPP loan. We've gotten a lot of questions emailed to us and had people just ask us straight out. So Kathy and I today are going to sit and we're going to read the questions that we've got. She's going to answer them. Feel free while we're on this live video to throw some more questions at us, and we'll be sure to answer the ones that we can as soon as we can get to them. So Kathy, do you want to introduce yourself and just tell everybody a little bit about your history and where you're at and what you're doing, and then we'll start?
Sure, Barb. Thanks a lot, everybody. Hey, my name is Kathy Smith, and I run Best Choice Bookkeeping and Tax Service. I've been in business almost 30 years. I've been doing taxes for about 20 of that. I am an enrolled agent, which means that I work as an individual tax preparer, but I have been licensed by the IRS, but I don't work for the IRS. I can represent a client in front of the IRS. So I'm an enrolled agent, not a CPA, but I have passed a number of exams that certify me to be classified as an enrolled agent. So I feel very proud of that. I have been meeting with people in my home. I have a large clientele at this point, about 250 taxes a year. I do 60 or so businesses, LLCs, corps, partnerships, a couple of nonprofits, even take care of a fire department. So I like to keep up with what's going on. And believe me, this past year, there has been a real challenge in trying to keep up with what's been going on. It has literally been like a race to the finish trying to figure out everything. And not the least of that is all of this PPP stuff. And the PPP stands for Paycheck Protection Program, which I'm sure that if you're in business, you have heard a lot about it. And some people have really benefited from that this past year, getting the money, and it actually was their lifeline for their survival. So the other thing was that they got forgiveness for the money, or they're in the process of getting forgiveness. And now guess what? They have rolled out a second wave of this, second and third wave. So I'm going to give it back to Barb and let her go through some of the questions, and we'll just do a Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you, Kathy. So you mentioned that they're now rolling out round 2 of this. What are the qualifications for round 2 for the PPP?
Okay, so thanks, Barb. You have to have passed at least 3 qualifications. And first of all, the first thing you have to have is that you have already, if you got the first loan, you have to have used up the money. You can't have it sitting in a bank somewhere. You've got to have used up the first loan amount of money. The second thing, the first one had no more than 500 employees that you could be qualified for. They've brought that down to no more than 300 employees to be qualified for it. And this third thing for the second wave is that you need to show a 25% reduction in your gross receipts from 2019 to 2020. So in other words, let's say if you made $100,000 in 2019, but you only made $75,000 in 2020, then that qualifies you for that second wave. And it can either be a full year, a 12-month period, or if you can show a 25% reduction even in just 1 quarter, that is supposed to allow you to also be eligible for the PPP second wave. And then a lot of people who didn't apply for the first wave back in back last year, they still can apply for the first wave. It's kind of like they're opening that back up and making that available. That particular one, if you never got the loan in the first place, if you have over 500 employees, then you can apply for that one. And I don't believe at this point you have to show any kind of a reduction because you never applied for the first loan. So those are some of the qualifications. And I know one of the people asked if you only went into business in 2020, so you don't have anything from 2019. and you can just go and apply for the loan that you might need, even with just being in business that first year of 2020.
Perfect. What documentation is needed to apply?
Well, you're going to need payroll records for your employees, because what they're going to do is they're going to take the payroll and they're going to take the whole entire year, divide it by 12, and multiply that times 2.5 to come up with your availability, along with, and that's pretty much it. And then you can also throw in your rent and utilities if you've got them. The majority of what they're going to ask you for, though, is really more related around the payroll than it is. I mean, you can still use the other money you can use money to pay for the rent and the utilities. But one of the very important parameters is that you have to spend at least 60% of this money on payroll and related expenses. And related expenses to payroll would be like health insurance for the employee, and any kind of 401k company contributions, and also your state unemployment taxes. Now, they're not allowing you to take into account the employer's portion of the taxes, but they will take into account the state unemployment taxes. So those four things comprise the basis of what you're looking at for your criteria.
Perfect. And what is the forgiveness criteria for the PPP?
Okay, and as I just said, you have to show that you spend at least 60% of that on those related payroll items. So that leaves you the other 40% to spend on rent, utilities. The other things that they have added in this second wave have to do with COVID COVID protection and any kind of things that deal with the COVID help, and also government imposed COVID restrictions, as well as, they said, property damage, cloud computing, and supplier costs. So as long as you can show that, like, let's just say, again, using that $100,000 figure, that's 2.5 months of your payroll. So 60% of that, which would be $60,000, as long as you can prove out $60,000 over either, and you have two periods that you can pick from, either an 8-week period or a 24-week period. And there is a little bit of a thing about retaining the employees that you had originally. So like in 2019, if you had, let's say that you had 10 employees, then they want you to show that you retained those 10 employees for 2020. And so those are some of the questions on the forgiveness application that they're going to ask you. Did you have 10 employees in 19? So do you have 10 employees in 2020? Now, for the second and third wave, I would imagine that what they're going to ask you is, how many employees did you have in 2020? So for this new wave, did you keep the 10 employees that you had from the previous year? Because ultimately, the whole purpose of this loan is to retain your people and keep your company up and running and viable.
Right. So obviously you're going to need payroll documentation for the forgiveness. What other types of documentation is going to be needed for that?
Oh, there's more, much more.
I kind of figured.
Yeah, if you use some of this money to pay mortgage interest or rent, you have got to have the lease or the document of the purchase, and these all have to be before a certain date. I think the original was before February the 15th of 2020. Now, what the new date range is going to be for this second and third wave, I'm not really sure. I would assume that it would have to be back in 2020, since this is 2021. But then you're also going to have to show paid receipts. You're going to have to show the invoices for the utilities. You're going to have to show those bills. You're going to have to show that that it's in the business's name. It can't be in an individual's name. It has to be, all of these things have to be in the business's name. So anyone that's operating from their home, my advice to you is just use it for payroll costs. Don't try either payroll costs or COVID covering costs, or possibly because most of those other things are going to be in your personal name. And it's going to be really hard to prove out that those costs, even though they're legitimate business costs, it's going to be hard to prove those out that they were for the business because they're in your personal name. So if you're a company and you're renting a place and it's the lease is in the company's name or the utilities are in the company's name, then you're going to need those bills and those paid receipts. And guess what else you need? Bank statements. You're going to need copies of those bank statements that are going to show that you actually paid these amounts. And you're going to need to submit all of this to the bank that you're going through, who is being the representative for the SBA. Because ultimately, these are SBA loans. The loans are being processed from SBA over to the bank, and the bank is kind of more or less the middleman, if you will, who's helping the SBA give you this loan. So they're collecting all of this data to be able to, if SBA says, hey, we need to see such and such, then the bank can say, oh, here it is. And I would assume that for the second and third wave, your 25% reduction in receipts, that's going to necessitate a profit and loss statement of the prior year and the current year, or so for 19 and 20. So again, you would need that profit and loss statement for 2019 to show that, hey, my profit and loss for 2020, which hopefully you're getting done and getting that all figured up for taxes come February, March, and April of this year. But you can be able to show that you did have that legitimate reduction in receipts from the profit and loss. Now, you cannot count sales tax. So, hopefully if some people include that as receipts, that's not going to count. Extraordinary income like capital gains or interest or anything that's not really related to the operation of the business, that's not going to count either. But whatever your normal business income is, you need to show that 25% reduction to get that second round of PPP loans.
Perfect.
And forgiveness.
Perfect. So we just had a question come in. Can you use the PPP funds for franchise fees and or marketing expenses?
Well, it didn't mention that in the documentation that I was looking at. So I would say what I'm looking at here, and let me read this. It says this was the additional stuff beyond mortgage and rent payments and utilities. PPP money may now cover costs of personal protective equipment, other expenses incurred to meet government-imposed COVID restrictions, as well as property damage, cloud computing, and supplier costs. So I would basically stay within those parameters because whatever you cannot justify, then guess what? That gets rolled into a loan. Although that's not a bad thing because then the loan repayment terms for those are quite generous. If marketing and advertising is something that you need to spend that money on and you're well within your range of the 60% for the payroll, and marketing and advertising is what you need to help you, just recognize that it's probably not going to be forgivable.
Okay. So there is a chance that a majority of the items are forgivable though, correct?
Well, yeah, all of the things that I just read to you, as long as you can sustain the 60% mark on the payroll, including the health insurance and the 401k company paid contribution, those are, and the unemployment. So 60% of the money has to be spent on that, whether you go 8 weeks or whether you go the 24. And a lot of people only want to go the 8 weeks because then that gives them a shorter time frame to use up the money. And then they don't have to justify 10 or 12 employees for 24 weeks, as opposed to justifying and keeping 10 or 12 employees for 8 weeks. In other words, it gives them a little more flexibility. I mean, shoot, 24 weeks is almost half a year. Who knows how the business is going to go in 6 months, as opposed to a 2-month time period. And the other thing too, that's really important to remember is if you are a sole proprietor or a shareholder, or sole shareholder in a corporation, you cannot pay yourself more than what you were paid in 2019 as salary. And you cannot go above $100,000 a year. So any of these companies where they're paying the principals 200 grand a year, it immediately squishes that down to the $100,000 salary per person or less for that year. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about this.
Perfect. Well, I hopefully I don't have any questions coming in right now. So hopefully this was enough information for everybody, and everybody, got what they needed out of it. Again, Kathy, if we have any questions come in shortly, can I just field them to you?
Sure.
And we can go
Sure.
from there?
One other thing I would like to mention that I don't know if anyone out there is listening is part of a restaurant or a hotel industry. If you have a NAICS number that starts, and NAICS means that it's an identification number that starts with 72, that it gives you the identification of a restaurant or a hotel or some sort of a hospitality thing. They are going all the way up with this new wave. They are going all the way up to 3.5 months of payroll. So that's good for them because they realize that they have been harder hit than most as far as that goes. So their particular range or window of money is even farther and bigger than the 2.5 months. So that's good news for the restaurants and the hotels and the hospitality industry, that 3.5 months is the time frame for them, as opposed to 2.5 months for all other businesses.
Perfect. Kathy, I cannot thank you enough for being here today and for, helping us out and trying to clear the muddy waters for us a little bit around this PPP. Again, we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the privilege and the opportunity, Barb. I really appreciate Barb. I just want to tell you that she is an awesome virtual assistant. She knows her stuff, and she's a great person as far as doing the business, and easy to work with.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
All right, guys. Barb Nelson with Beacon Virtual Assistants. Hopefully this cleared some of this up for you. And I will see you again next time. Have a great afternoon.
All right. Thanks, Barb. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.